Fair enough.
Yeah.
Good morning. How are we all? So, deathly silence. That's not like you, boys.
It's sunny shining, Laura, so I am good, and I'm about to go on a lovely walk over what's called the Captain's Road here, which is an old drover's road and finishes at a pub. So I'm in good form.
Excellent. Fantastic.
And I am a little tired because the cat decided at 5 o'clock this morning that it wanted food, and it decided I was the person rather than its mother, who always does everything for it. So it decided at 5 o'clock this morning, despite the fact that I was out last night, I should be the one that gets up and gives it food. And if it's been International Women's Day and it being a female cat, I thought I better oblige today, and away I went.
It's part of you men taking responsibility day, isn't it, Mark?
That's the start of it.
Well, it would be remiss of me if I didn't express my absolute gratitude to both Mrs. Glyde and Mrs. Caroline and your respective families for allowing me to drag you in from respective duties on a Saturday morning. So I am pleased to express my gratitude to both of them. But I'm also exceptionally grateful to you both because I know you both have very big reservations about stepping into this space, which International Women's Day. Although you reframed it quite nicely, Mark, in your post about actually maybe it's International Day of Men Stepping Up or taking responsibility, or words to that effect. So I like that. And yet here we are. And but the irony wasn't lost on me this morning that I have a pack of kintsugi cards, and for those who are not familiar with kintsugi, it's the ancient Japanese art of golden repair. The idea that even when in our most broken moments, we can create something even more beautiful and resilient than before, which I think is quite poignant. And the card I picked was believe. And I think that kind of sets the scene for this, because we have to believe in better. We have to believe that there is always, always, always a way forward. And for me, that if we truly want to accelerate action, we have to actually move beyond the talk and into real change. Because I read a stat sometime this week. I've seen a lot of stats this week. But I think the current estimates at the current pace is that it will take us another 130 years for gender parity. I mean, so that's not going to happen in any one of our lifetimes.
Wow.
It's just not good enough. I mean, that's a long time. And that's not even necessarily your children's lifetime either. So if we want different, we must do different. And for me, that different and believing, to use the Gandhi phrase, which I know you both used this week, is to be the change that we want to see in the world. For me, it has to have men as allies. And you both have been tremendous allies of mine since we met on LinkedIn, because we've never actually met in real life other than through a laptop. But, we have been on a journey through the Are You Truly Living series, and now this is, sort of another dimension. And so I'm exceptionally grateful for you both being allies and in my world. So I want to say thank you both for stepping up and stepping out, and for believing that change really is possible, but it's also necessary. And this is our first step today on a very poignant day for us all. So I know, enough from me, but Dan, when you write your posts, I'm always saying that we're more similar than we're different, because so much of what you write resonates really, really, really loudly for me. A lot of the experiences that you describe, I feel them too. And, truly, I'm not a man. But I think for me, it then provokes me to ask a question about, is it just a lack of open and honest conversations between men and women? Or, what is it? Is it something deeper than that?
I mean, that is certainly that's certainly a factor. We all make assumptions all the time. We think we know based on what happened in the past. And I love your Kintsugi card today, believe, right? Because beliefs are so important. They shape the lens through which we see the world, right? Now, there'll be guys out there today going, International Women's Day. There's no International Men's Day. Why have we got to do it? You know what I mean? That this is this belief that life is pie. And but by trying to elevate women, they're somehow taking a piece of their pie. So Julie showed me something this morning on Instagram, a poll where they'd polled Generation Z, and they've decided in this poll that equality's gone far enough, 56%. And it's like, well, equality, how can equality go far enough? How can it be an end point for equality, right? Well, that's, for a kickoff, that's a fundamental misunderstanding of what equality is, right? And what do you mean gone far enough? It just baffles me, right? It absolutely baffles me. And again, this is driven by belief. There's a great phrase out there when I'm not sure who to attribute it to, but I first heard it from Lily Allen, the pop singer, where she said, if privilege is your normal, equality feels like oppression, right? So there's a lot of men out there feeling oppressed and feeling attacked. And this view, that's enough equality. Let's get rid of DEI. We don't need it. It's not a thing anymore. It's like, well, how can equity and inclusion be a bad thing? How can that ever be a bad thing? I don't get it. But that's, again, it's that belief, Laura, isn't it? And then this whole, it's not all men. And again, that's a belief, but that's apathy. That's shrugging our shoulders. And like you were saying, if nothing changes, nothing changes. Shrugging us, it's not me. Well, I have nothing I can do about it. I'm not a predator. I'm not attacking anybody. I'm not discriminating against anybody. And it's like, no, but you are part of the culture that created the circumstances for this stuff to go on. And we're all responsible for that, every single one of us. And unless we all get together as one, we stop this gender war and this constant comparison. Now, I'm somebody who works with men and talks about men. So here I am, Mr. Hypocrite, saying, because all my stuff is about men, because I'm talking to men and doing things for men, right? But that doesn't mean that I'm doing that to the exclusion of anybody else, because I see a particular problem with men's identity, and I went through particular problems that were to do with being a man and being masculine. So I know there are particular things that I can help with, right? But that doesn't mean that I do that to the exclusion of anything or anyone else. And as you always say, Laura, and lots of women turn up on my content and this is me, I go through this. And I'm like, this isn't exclusive. We all go through the same things. We all have the same problems. We all create the culture and the society in which we live. And we can either get on the front foot, take action and do stuff and be a part of it, an active, deliberate part of it, or it can just happen around us and we can be powerless and put our hands up and say, not all men, not me, Gov. No, it's not all men, but it is all women, right? And we've all got mothers, sisters, wives, daughters. We don't want a world where they don't feel safe, do we? Right? We don't. We don't want a world like that. We don't want a world where violence against women is the only violent crime that's on the rise. We don't want that world, do we? So shrugging our shoulders and saying it's not all men is just not going to cut it anymore. It doesn't work. We've got to do things differently. We've got to look at the way we talk. We've got to look at our institutions. We've got to look at the rules we set for ourselves. And that word you said, Laura, we've got to check our own beliefs.
Absolutely. And I think that is the thing, isn't it? We have to check in with ourselves, because for me, it's all about humanity. I mean, irrespective of the gender, it's how to treat people with humanity. But, Mark, why do men hesitate to step into that space so much? Is it, do you think?
It's a big question. There's a lot in that, Laura. Like, I suppose I'll go back to the dinner table in my house this week, and I said, I'm doing something on International Women's Day. Too much abuse from the three women at the dinner table, and I was expecting that. I said, no, hold on a second. There's a reason. There's a point to this, And my wife made a very valid point, and you used the word belief there, Laura, about belief, and we don't believe women, I think, is a part of it. Like, you know, as much as the beliefs we hold, we don't actually believe women. And I know there's a larger context to that as well, in terms of criminal activity and you know, sexual abuse cases and this kind of stuff, and believe all women and that kind of thing, right? But let's break it down to a more similar thing, right? My wife would tell me about, she wants to, like, we go for a walk a lot. She wants to, but I'm busy. I've got a client in that night. And she's like, she want to go for a walk. And I said, but like, you're fine. That road is fine. But she tells me she doesn't feel safe. But I tell her she should feel safe. Why am I telling her she should feel safe? Because I feel safe. I was out walking this morning at 6 a.m. I had to walk back into town to get my car. And I was just thinking to myself this morning, there's not a single woman walking here at 6 a.m. this morning, because it's not safe. Because there's nobody around. But I told her she should feel safe. I pointed out all the reasons why she should feel safe. Because there's loads of cars traveling on the road. Somebody would see you, you know, you could make noise. All these reasons. And then she said, yeah, but that's why I don't have my headphones on. They're in my ears, but they're not on, so I can hear. Because I have to be able to listen, because I don't feel safe. And yet I tell her she should feel safe. So not only is that not believing her or not listening to her, that's dictating to her that she should feel safe, which is completely and utterly wrong on my part. So then why do we not get this? To your question, why do we not? Because we don't see it. We don't see it from our perspective. From a woman's perspective. Like, I think we don't acknowledge what it's actually like to be a woman. You know, we don't acknowledge what it's like to feel that you could be in danger as you walk down the street, that you have to be very conscious. So we would do that. We'd be conscious of dangers and threats in a male kind of way. But we're never really that concerned about getting physically attacked in that way, that somebody's going to come and domineer us and take over us. We don't really think to that end. So the challenge for us is we need to start to understand what it's actually like to be a woman. We need to actually listen to the experience of a woman, because we need to change our understanding. As much as it's our belief thing, we need to change our understanding. Because like the conversation we had on Tuesday, myself and my wife have had that conversation a lot of times. And she says to me, look, I know you're a good man, but yet you're wrong in this. And I know you support me, but yet you're wrong in this. And she's right. She's right. I still tell her she should feel safe. After having this conversation with her for years, I still tell her she should feel safe. So I need to be in her shoes. We need to actually take a walk in a woman's shoes and understand what it is. Because when we begin to see it, when we begin to understand it from that perspective, when we listen, then we can change. And then we can begin to change. But until we do that, we're never going to change.
And that takes courage, Mark, right? That's a really hard thing to do. It's tough to do that. I've tried to do it myself. I watched a film quite recently. I can't remember what it's called, but it's about women and that lived experience and that you know, that interaction they have with men, and then having to try and extricate themselves from a situation without upsetting the man, and I'd never put myself in those shoes. I hadn't had that lived experience. I just haven't. And then I watched that film and I cried for the rest of the afternoon. I couldn't stop, because I was facing the reality of women's lived experience, and probably for the first time in my life. And it broke my heart to know that I have been part of this culture. I have told sexist jokes. I have derided the feminine. I've told people, you throw like a girl. I've called people a big girl's blouse. This all, you know, it seems throwaway and funny. And why does it matter? I can't fucking say anything anymore. But it's important. The language we use, that, you know, and the more I thought about it, the worse I felt, and the more it broke my heart. But it was so important for me to go through that, to put myself, to walk a mile in the shoes of a woman and understand what their lived experience is. But it's hard, but it's got to be done.
No, you're out. I mean, both of you spot on. It's that whole thing. And what's the phrase? Until you've walked in somebody else's shoes, you I don't know, you criticize whatever the whole phrase is. But it's so true. You can't fully understand what you've not lived. And actually, Mark, it's really interesting you say about your wife's lack of use of earphones when she's running in the dark. Or running out alone at sort of either ends of the day. Because actually, even as a woman, that's not something I would have contemplated until I did with Kent Police. I did a walk and talk in one of the towns in the district, and started talking to men and women in the community about how safe they felt. And that was the first time somebody had raised it to me. So I think that it's not just men stepping into women's shoes and understanding their lived experience. I think it's also women stepping in. I think it's, so I go back to my point about, it's about humanity and understanding humanity and being more compassionate and kind and understanding to one another. Because for me, it's like we never know what someone's real lived experience is. We need to seek to understand within this. But I'm just reading Michael's comment here. Let me pop it up. It's probably going to take quite a bit of the screen, but women are much more in danger in the home than outside of it. Once everybody understands that all women will feel safer outside their homes naturally, understanding women's perception on reality is based on men's propaganda of the reality of violence. Yes, it isn't the whole story, and there's much more, but it is relevant, Michael. And he's right. And I think that's part of, it's beyond this conversation, but that's part of the reason we are launching the Safe Havens initiative, so that people have a place where they can go safely to reach out, because I recognise that it's not necessarily when we're out and about. I think for me, you talk about, believing their lens of the world, I guess, is probably what we're saying here, and the lived experience they have. And it's really interesting. One of the stats is that 79% of men in senior leadership believe women are well represented in leadership. Yet only 55% of women agree. I think that beautifully captures what you've just both described, this, this belief and lack of understanding, perception versus the reality is not the same.
Yeah, it's tough, isn't it, Laura? And it's why we need, as you said, it's about conversations. And again, what Michael is saying there, right? He's talking about the reality of the statistics. But the difficulty, what you've got to be really careful of, what Michael's saying there, is dismissing that feeling that I'm not safe outside of my home. Statistically, actually, you're more likely to be a victim of violence if you're a man. Men are more of victims of violence more often than women are. But that just shuts down the conversation. That dismisses women and dismisses their point of view and the way they feel. And we've got to be really careful not to do that. Yes, we can look at statistics. Yes, if we're going to make changes, we want to make changes that are going to work. So we've got to say, actually, it's inside the home where the problems are. So this is what we've got to talk about. But when we do that, we've got to be really careful. Michael's comment there starts, but women are much more in danger in the home than outside of it. For me, that feels a little bit like we're telling women how to feel. We've got to be really, really careful of that, because we've been doing it for hundreds of years, and it's got to stop.
Yeah, and I think the other thing for me is, it is a stat, but 18% of women only will report what's happening to them. Is the stat that really screams home to me, because that says they don't feel safe enough to report. They don't feel that they've got options. The environment isn't safe enough for them to report. And so, what do we do? There's clearly a huge disconnect as to how we make that change. But, for all of us, how do we start shifting that narrative? What is it? Just checking ourselves out. I mean, Dan, I know that you have said before, with Julie, that until you really, really got to know, why. And I very vividly remember you talking about an instance where you'd really appreciated her perspective on home and the house, and I forget exactly how you're talking about it, but it was a very poignant point that you'd made, and you stepped into her shoes to understand.
I think that's about emotional load, was it, Laura?
Something like that. But
and Julie being the project manager of our lives. and that learning that, because I couldn't get it. So there'd be times Julie would get upset with me because I hadn't done something, hadn't done some washing or something like that. And I'd look and go, it can be done tomorrow. Like, what's the issue? There's no issue here. That's fine. I'll do it tomorrow. Don't worry. It just wasn't a priority for me today. I had other things to do. But actually, what I was failing to understand there, and again, this is a product of our culture, is that Julie takes on the responsibility for organising our house, for getting everything done. And when I don't do that, and don't get me wrong, I contribute in my house. I do a lot. But what I don't do is I don't take responsibility for it all. I don't care most of the time, if I'm really honest, whether things are done or they're not. Whereas for Julie, she feels that responsibility, and it's an emotional load. She's thinking, right, oh, we've got to get this washing done by this time. I need to organise that. I've got to get this insurance organised. I need to do this. I'm not thinking that. I'm never doing it. I just show up and do what needs to be done. And understand for the first time in my life, going, yeah, she's right. I don't take responsibility for that stuff. I don't take on that emotional load. It doesn't even occur to me. I might look at the washing basket and go, do you know what? Yeah, I'm going to put a wash load on today. But I'm not thinking about how that connects to everybody else in the house and whether somebody needs this at this time and this at this, because I don't organise that stuff. I just rock up and do what I do when I do it. And it's not that Julie's saying to me, no, you've got to take this responsibility, but just understand that I am.
No, it was such a beautiful example, because I think that is where there is a difference between the way that men and women necessarily see the same things, but it's that understanding that actually makes such a huge, massive difference, and not just to relationships, but to the world generally. When we understand that, neither way is wrong or right. It's just different. And if we understand that, then there's so much more that we can do together. But how Mark, how do we shift this sort of kind of narrative from this sort of blame to, because look, I'll be the first person to tell you, that if somebody tells me to do something, I'm not necessarily going to embrace it and shall we say. So I'm not very good. You can't do that. That's wrong. If somebody starts with that narrative, I'm probably not going to be terribly receptive. So, and I think, men possibly, feel the same perhaps. But, it can feel like it's just, we're doing it all wrong. But you don't know what you don't know, right? That's true for anybody.
Mm-hmm. I think so, because you're right. Look, we do not like being told, because that just means that we fight against what we're told and told to do. But we need to be asked questions. We need to be challenged as opposed to being told. Why are you doing this? What's the logic behind that? Why are you thinking that? Like, okay, let's bring it back to groups of men, right? And male friends. The reason why the sexist culture persists is because it's not challenged. You're in a group, somebody will say something untoward about, say, a woman walking past. It's fine, it's not challenged. No one's going to challenge it. If it was your daughter, it'd be entirely unacceptable. So, what makes it acceptable versus what makes it unacceptable, right? What's banter versus what's not banter? I know you alluded to that earlier. So it needs to be that challenge in order to change it. Let's take a silly example here, right? You look at a family traveling in a car, right? And I would say that, let's say, I'm going to make a statistic up on the spot, right? But 80% of the times, maybe 90% of the time, the man is driving the car. Why is the man driving the car? Because the man drives the car. But has the man asked the woman, would you like to drive the car today? Probably not, because they just assume the role. I am the person who leads, who drives, who does this, rather than just asking the question, would you like to drive the car? It's a silly example, but it's also true. It just highlights the fact that culturally we just allow the thing to be the way it is because the thing is the way it is. And to bring it back to that identity thing in it, right? Well, I have to drive the car because I'm the man. If I'm not seen driving the car, what does that say about me and who I am as a man? That says that you asked your wife that you want to drive and she said yes. It doesn't say that you're less of a man because you're not driving the car. But that's just an example of how it's so ingrained in how we think about things. And I think maybe we start with simple questions like that. Do you need to drive the car today? What would happen if I drove the car today? What would happen if your wife drove the car today? Like, it has to be in that way that we try and create the thinking. So if someone walks by, well, what if that was your daughter that those comments were made about? The thinking has to change in that way. Because if you say to someone, don't do that, it's not going to engender the right conversation, as opposed to, what do you think was right about that? What could you have done differently there? Like, is this acceptable? Like, how many men have been in a group where somebody put their hand up and said, you know what, that's not acceptable? It's very rare. It's very, very rare, even though it's the times are regular when it happens, but it's very, very rare to say it's not acceptable. So our challenge comes in that we have to actually put the hand up and say, well, what's acceptable? Is this okay? And maybe the question becomes as simple as, is this okay? Because that allows for the conversation, and only through the conversation will we begin to change things.
Absolutely spot on. I think it is that conversation. As you were saying that, I was thinking of my dad, who's been dead many years now, but he used to say his nickname was MF, my fault. Because he just said, I've just got to the point where, if I do it this way, I'm wrong. If I do it this way, I'm wrong. So I'll just be, compliant and complicit. And I'm just like, but that's not the answer either.
Yeah.
It's I mean, he was saying it tongue in cheek, because he and my mum actually were an amazing team. But it does stick in my mind, because I just think it's that, it is back to having that conversation and understanding, and Michael saying it's seeing things from others' position, whether it's factually correct or not, is the empathy we all need to share. And that's absolutely spot on, because whether it is factually correct or not is almost immaterial, because if that is that person's perception of reality, that is their perception of reality. They are seeing it through their lens of the world. Talking with some of the ladies last night at this International Women's Day event I was speaking at, and just even this wide range of ages, demographic profiles. There were men in the room as well, so we were very proud that they were there. And it just even their lived realities were very, very different. But that's why we need to continue to seek to understand and have those conversations. But yet we don't do it enough. So what's stopping us having those conversations, do you think?
Can I sit down? If I could just jump in for just one quick second, just the last point I was making. It's like I was just thinking there, Laura, as you were saying that, right? Any man who has a daughter, right? And I suppose I was talking a bit about having daughters this morning, right? If your daughter at the age of 3 says she wants to have a tea party, you sit down at that at that table and you have a tea party with her and all her teddies. If she says, Dad, I want you to put on a tutu and I'm going to paint your face, you say, absolutely, you do that. So what is the disconnect between that being okay because she needs it and it not being okay when you step outside the house into the world? What is that disconnect right there?
We've got to get over ourselves, Mark, isn't it? That the disconnect is, it's our ego. It's our status and our reputation and how we're going to be perceived by other men. So in the quiet of our own home, we're happy to put makeup on our face and dress up in a tutu and play fairies with our daughter. But outside the home, we want to look strong. We want to look like we want to show no weakness. We're concerned about where our hierarchy is and where we are in the pecking order with other men. And this is the real struggle for men, is getting over our ego and to stop feeling attacked when we're talking about women and their lived experience and how they feel. Like the points that Michael has made, and there are statistics, and if we're going to tackle this stuff and make changes, we've got to look at facts. We've got to look at where do we need to put our attention, what really needs our work and our energy. But at the same time, we can't assume to know what somebody else's lived experience is. We can't approach everything with logic and reason and therefore dismiss the way people feel. And that's a very masculine thing to do. And I'm not saying it's men that do it, but it's a masculine thing to do, to approach things with logic and reason, and which is great. Yeah, and and this is the thing, you see, it's about, we've got to get over this image of ourselves. It's got to become acceptable for men just to be themselves and not to have to put this image out there, not to be, it seems to have, it's come back with a vengeance in recent times, and it comes from insecurity, and it comes from not knowing who we are. But this manliness thing, this machismo, this alpha male, which doesn't actually really exist in humans, it's made up. And we've got to get over this stuff. It's getting in the way. It's holding our young boys back. It's infecting them with this thinking, which is going to stop us from having these conversations. It stops us from understanding from everybody's point of view, everybody's lived experience, how everybody feels. It shuts down conversation, where men think we can't be vulnerable, we can't share how we really feel, we can't have these open and honest conversations because it might reduce how we're seen in the eyes of others. We've got to get over that, and we've got to stop feeling every time we're talking about women's experience that it's some sort of attack on men and that they're not included in the conversation. We're all included in this. This is on all of us. This is all of our responsibility to change it. We don't want to live in this world, do we? We don't want to live in a world where women don't feel safe. We don't. When I first heard that man and bear thing that took off on social media, it broke my heart to think that any woman would want to be in the woods with a bear and not me, because I would never harm anybody ever. But yet, the more I think about it, the more I get it. Because Julie said to me, would you want me to be in the woods with a man or a bear? And when it came down to it, I chose the flipping bear.
Mm.
Yeah, it's and I think that's the thing, for me, it's, we're not enemies. It's, we all want safe, thriving communities. We all want, people to flourish. For me, the answer is absolutely collaboration, not confrontation. So, conscious it is a beautiful, well, certainly here in sunny Tunbridge Wells, it is sunny for a change. And I know, Dan, you have a mountain to climb and a pub to go and have a nice cool beer with Julian once you get to the top. And Mark, no doubt, you and the girls have got some plans for the day. But I guess just, what one step that we can all take, like today, right now, that we can all take that can start beginning to shift the narrative, accelerate action, because Heather made a point earlier on when I was saying it's 130 years. Heather was saying she'd read it's going to take 7 generations before if we carry on at the current speed. So we really do need to embrace this idea of accelerating action, and for me that has to be having men as allies to take a step forward. So how do we? What is one step action we can take today, starting today, that we can continue on from here?
Well, I think we need to redefine what it is to man up, Laura. So, because we have this idea of man up as being tough and being strong, and man up is creating a space so that women are safe. Man up is standing against what's not right. That's manning up. My connection's going, is it?
No, I think you're still here.
Right. Sorry, yeah, it's getting a bit jittery there. So yeah, that's what manning up is. So I think we need to redefine what manning up is. Like you'll sometimes see a video on social media where they show, like I mentioned earlier, that a man dressing up and doing for his kids, and they'll see a guy in public doing that and go, "Oh, isn't that great? Look at the support he's shown for his daughter." Why do we not all do that? Do whatever's necessary, because that's real what manning up is. And that's maybe back to the point about being challenged, where you have to challenge going, that's not being a man. What is being a real man? Like, I often think, I look at my dad, and my dad used to drive my sister from where we were in Central Ireland right down to the very south coast of Ireland, right? This is back in the 90s when the roads were crap, it wasn't main roads. So probably talking about 4.5 hours, 5 hours to get down and 5 hours to come back on his own, right? because the buses were too difficult for her to go up to Dublin and get another one down. It took her all day traveling. So instead of that, he manned up and he did what he thought was the most necessary thing for his daughter. He just drove her the whole way down and drove back on his own, because he wanted to do what was right by her. So we need to expand. That's manning up in my book. That's the right thing to do. And so we need to expand that thinking. How do I man up in the right way? Because I want this woman in my life, or any woman that sees me, to think, this man is making sure this place is safer for me. This man is making sure that I am not restricted by whatever is in this environment, whatever is in this culture. And that's manning up. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to talk about what it is to be a man.
Yeah, and it starts with you, doesn't it? That's the simple thing we can all do right now is look at ourselves, is turn our attention on ourselves. Are we stepping up? This shrugging the shoulders, it's not all men, does not cut it. What are we doing to make the world safer? What are we doing to demonstrate to women that we are safe, that we are a safe space, that we are safer than the bear? What are we doing? What can I do? How can I change the way I think, the way I speak, what I believe, how I see the world, how I treat women, how I talk about women? How can I do that? What can I do personally? Not all this pointing fingers and blaming and thinking it's us versus them and that life is pie and that something's been taken away from me if we're lifting other people up. No, turn your attention inwards. Be the change, as you said earlier, Laura. What can I do? It doesn't have to be anything drastic, anything massive, but are there words I'm using I shouldn't use anymore? Are there ways of speaking that I shouldn't be doing anymore? Are there ways that I look at and treat and talk about women that I shouldn't do anymore? Ask yourself those questions and then be the change. Put yourself in the shoes. Think, if you've got daughters or you've got a sister or your wife, think about their lived experience. What can you do? What would you like them to experience out in the world? Be that.
I love that. And I think, Michael's put a great point here. The truth needs to lead the way. And I think that's it. And that you have to listen to other people's truth, because it is the truth for them. And I think that is beautiful, because it is about humanity at the end of the day. And that's I'm going to keep saying that, because for me it is that we all believe in a better world, and that has to mean that we have everybody together, because we are stronger together without a doubt, but we can't assume that everybody understands everything. So we have to have more open and honest conversations, and, as Michael says, to allow people's truth to lead the way. So thank you so much for those who've joined us. Thank you both to you and beautiful women in your life who've allowed me to steal you for 40 minutes on a Saturday morning. For those who want to join the movement, please do scan the QR code. It should take you to the website together as allies.org. There's not a lot on there just yet, but perhaps this weekend's project. But yes, so do sign up, because this is the first of many. So in the meantime, enjoy the rest of International Women's Day, or Men Taking Responsibility Day. And thank you both.
Thanks, Laura. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a nice opportunity to have this chat.